Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, June the 4th, 2021. I'm going to start out tonight by speaking about the twilight of authority. And I'll begin with Jim Kunstler's column for today, What If the Big Lie is the Big Lie? Maybe now that Dr. Tony Fauci has begun to spill the beans on his doings in service to the Wuhan virology lab, the phrase conspiracy theory, flogged by the media as jauntily and incessantly as by the Soviet commissars of yore, will have worn out its welcome. In a sane polity, Dr. Fauci would be cooked. He looks circumstantially like an epic villain of history who promoted and funded dangerous research activities knowingly, which led to an international disaster that killed millions of people and destroyed countless livelihoods and households, perhaps even the whole global economy when all is said and done. And he appears to have lied at every step along the way. As a practical matter, what is the Joe Biden administration going to do about him? Throw him under the bus? I don't think they can at this point. Dr. Fauci has come to represent not just the falsehoods employed around the COVID-19 fiasco, but more generally, the long campaign against truth itself by a grossly illiberal Jacobin Democratic Party, seemingly out to punish and destroy Western civilization. Whether the COVID-19 pandemic was an overt tactic in that campaign or just the result of Dr. Fauci's catastrophic bad judgment remains to be revealed. But at least half the country will conclude that there's some connection between the terrible losses suffered in the pandemic year and all the political bullshit they were force-fed in the 4-year effort to defenestrate Donald Trump. All Joe Biden's handlers can do now is fade Dr. Fauci out, keep him off the cable channels, and hope the public can be distracted with some new nonsense. You also have good reason to doubt that Merrick Garland will do anything but look the other way and whistle. The downfall of Dr. Fauci is a watershed moment, Kunstler writes. There were so many more authorities caught lying over the past 5 years, but who got off scot-free. Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, James Comey, actually the whole FBI and DOJ E-suites, John Brennan, James Clapper, Robert Mueller, Andrew Weissman, Adam Schiff, and the editors and producers of the news media, plus the execs of social media, who not only disabled the truth at every opportunity, but just about destroyed the public's grip on reality. The result has been an utter collapse of authority in this land, so that now nobody who runs anything is credible, from the current pitiful president of the United States to most elected and appointed officials, judges, corporate CPOs, college deans, and presidents, and now the science itself. Just remember, there is still a sizable faction in America of people who are deeply interested in ascertaining the truth about a lot of things. Maybe now you can begin to see why this is important. Yet the cable news channels were really at it last night, Thursday, with Aaron Burnett and Anderson Cooper of CNN and the slippery crew at MSNBC strenuously assailing the Arizona election audit with their usual battery of appropriate slogans. It's a conspiracy theory, baseless, a big lie. It is perhaps more likely that their big lie is the big lie. It looks like we are about to find out. And perhaps not just in Arizona, because other states are warming to the audit idea. Joe Biden's DOJ may yet try to quash the Arizona audit, but one subsidiary truth to be gleaned in all this is that the audit is solely a state prerogative as a constitutional matter, and if the DOJ tries to lay some horseshit ruse about civil rights on the operation, they'll end up with their pants on fire, maybe even an official nullification. Sound a little Civil War-ish? So we can see that the disclosures over Dr. Fauci's role in the origins of COVID-19 and the potential discovery of 2020 election fraud are converging toward a deep constitutional crisis this summer. A growing number of Americans come to believe that the COVID-19 was a number run on them by the authorities. They may be more disposed to going forward with election audits in several states. And I'll have to skip this bit. I'll tell you something that could happen. Joe Biden, his handlers, and their factotums anyway, may try something else, another ruse to distract the public's attention from a constitutional crisis. How about crashing the financial markets? That would do the trick, I'm sure. In fact, it looks like the Federal Reserve is already tuning that frequency in by announcing it's tapering its bond buying activities, starting with corporate junk bonds. You know what will happen if they ramp up tapering of more bond purchases, currently around $120 billion a month? Interest rates will rise because who else will buy that paper at near zero interest rates? And by the way, Russia just announced it's about to sell off all of its sovereign holdings in US dollars. And when interest rates rise quickly, Wall Street's current business model goes south. Wait for that. Well, I've been hearing for a decade or so that interest rates, yes, of course, interest rates are going to rise because they can't remain at near zero forever. And I keep hearing it, and I keep hearing it, and I keep hearing it, and interest rates have remained at near zero forever. And there's a reason for that. The reason for that is that if interest rates rise significantly, the economy crashes. You know, we have the faked unemployment figures because they don't count people who have stopped looking for work. And we have the fake inflation numbers because they don't count things that people buy, you know, like real estate, medical care, university, that sort of thing, and many other things. But the GDP is sacrosanct. People can look around themselves in America, in Canada for that matter, and see that things are bad economically, very bad. And obviously paying people not to work, paying what in my country, what the majority of the population not to work is not going to last very long. But they've pointed to the GDP. Look at the GDP. Look at the GDP rising. Like Joe Biden was boasting about America's economy and the GDP rising. Well, why is it rising? Because the American government is creating all this money and pumping it out there. Yes, government inputs count as part of the GDP. That would be a very bold move by the Biden administration, no matter who is actually running it, to raise interest rates, because I don't know that the polity could actually take it. That would be the second deliberate tanking of the economy in 2 years. The first would be the COVID-19 hysteria. And if the economy tanks in the United States, really tanks, if the bubble bursts, then all bets are off. And I really don't think that the people in charge in Washington, or anywhere else for that matter, are willing to risk such a dose of harsh reality. Let's see what Ryan Landry has to say this morning. Ryan Landry, of course, is the editor and founder of the AmericanSun.com, which I commend to you. BuzzFeed and the Washington Post cover a treasure trove of over 3,000 emails from Dr. Fauci. The media is crafting a narrative of a cool under pressure Fauci. It doesn't work that easy on people locked down for 17 months thanks to his warnings. The question becomes why, and why now? Fauci is a lightning rod. He has his Fauci tattooed fans and his angry detractors. He also has made many Americans brush him off as a flip-flopping bureaucrat. He is an empty suit. This mail expose with redactions is a nice limited hangout for a figure associated with the 2020 coronavirus response. Fauci can resign or retire and make big bucks for foundations and collect speaking fees. The timing with Gates' divorce mud dragging is a bit too coincidental for the other big face from the 2020 coronavirus response. Fauci can be replaced with a new female figure to give us the vax to the max message. Why now should be obvious. The op is over. It's almost summer. They announced the vax news the day after the election. They lifted restrictions in January, and the mask mandate disappeared with one bad jobs report. Unemployment is ending. Office workers are getting their orders to come back, and slutty summer is almost here, you crazy singles. They want to go back to the before times, albeit with brand new tracking and surveillance powers. There needs to be a scapegoat because just as Derek Chauvin had no chance after that emotional 2020 for progressives, someone needs to suffer some prestige hits for the CDC mismanagement of coronavirus. Politicians relied on experts, so the experts are the easiest to do away with and be replaced by all new experts. Fauci will do, and it will please some angry conservatives who hated his guts. No one within their circle of trust will suffer professionally, but people will be shuffled around. Not a soul went to jail for Spygate, and no CDC official will suffer for this. Ryan Landry continues, Fauci should have realized his fortune rested on a slender reed, public adoration. Fauci bobbleheads, Fauci toys, and Fauci tattoos must have gone to his head. It all happened at such a late stage in his career and life. He must have loved it. None of the Fauci fan club members bothered to think how he did so many media interviews, yet still had time to do his job. He never turned down an interview. At that point, they should have realized his job was selling America on hysteria. He succeeded there with people who could not check his statements from 48 hours earlier. Alas, he failed at his real job. He also failed the public. His flip-flops and fumbling were his undoing, but the reopening of states with no adverse effects crushed him. The CDC still screamed about darkness ahead as Florida and Texas adjusted to normal with no dangerous spikes. All but the crazies were done with his line. And Ryan Landry concludes, for the damage Fauci did to people, businesses, and family, he deserves all God has in store for him. It is especially difficult to know he'll get a golden parachute from the regime because no matter the stat or fact you would say to your loved ones, they would not visit or even venture outside the house because that impish fraud was on television, scaring them that the apocalypse was here. Yes, here's a conspiracy theory du jour that Jeff Bezos has decided to take out his rival, Bill Gates, via Fauci. I'm not endorsing that, but it is an interesting idea, wouldn't you say? And after condemning everyone for the past year plus who dared suggest that the Wuhan Institute of Virology might be responsible for COVID-19, the media is on the case. This is from Keith Griffith of the Daily Mail. Revealed, State Department staff warned officials not to investigate Wuhan Lab's gain-of-function research because it would open a can of worms and expose U.S. funding. New report in Vanity Fair exposes the tug-of-war over COVID origin investigation. Trump appointee in State Department was warned by staff to back off lab theory. Staffers feared it would expose U.S. funding for gain-of-function research. WIV received grants for the research through nonprofit EcoHealth Alliance. EcoHealth head Peter Daszak spearheaded effort to crush lab leak theory. Top WIV scientist admitted in 2019 that some Chinese labs were neglected. Former Trump Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the National Institute of Health tried to suppress the department's investigation. Pompeo says there was pushback in his own department from people who did not agree with him or Trump. He also said he had to deal with internal debate from the National Institutes of Health. Yes, this Peter Daszak fellow, I wonder how much more we're going to hear about him. Is he going to be viewed as the real prime villain in this affair? According to the Mail, EcoHealth Alliance and its founder, Peter Daszak, have been working with Shi Zhengli, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a virologist known as the Bat Lady, for more than 15 years. A British-born Daszak, 55, is the president of EcoHealth, and in the early days of the pandemic, he was key in establishing the veneer of a, quote, scientific consensus, unquote, that the lab leak origin was impossible. Daszak not only signed, but spearheaded a letter signed by 27 scientists rejecting the lab leak hypothesis, which was published on February 19, 2020 in the medical journal The Lancet. Leaked emails later revealed that he encouraged colleagues who do gain-of-function research on coronaviruses not to sign the letter in order to obscure the connection. The letter declared that scientists had no competing interests, but it seems clear that Daszak did, as a lab leak origin would likely derail his entire field, but an animal origin would justify his life's work. Again, where are all the people clamoring for gain-of-function research to be shut down worldwide? I know these scientific monsters like to play around with things which could end the human race, but why are they allowed to do this? And why are taxpayer funds allowed to facilitate this? It just seems absolutely crazy to me, but again, so much does so these days. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Palcasso88, Dan Allison, Anrund, who says, Kunstler can write, have to give him that. Hello to William Hicks. Yo Mama says, conspiracy theories become conspiracy facts. Hello to Tricky Who and Gamayan, Chogo Kin 666. The night they drove old Floyd Square down and all the bells were ringing. Yes, that was a song by the band that became a hit by Joan Baez, of all people. The night they drove old Dixie down. Yes, we have shenanigans in, Minneapolis. The George Floyd Square was effaced, although there's going to be a hideous statue remaining in the middle of an intersection. And there was riots and looting in North Minneapolis after someone was shot by federal marshals. Hello to Yo Mama and Roulette Cracked. William Hicks says, a decade of near 0 to 0 interest rates in banks is severely discriminatory against those who are thrifty and know how to defer gratification, the most responsible among us. Yes, the late Oberon Waugh was complaining about this 4 years before he died, and he died quite some time ago, that thrifty, responsible people saved for their retirement, and after they retired, they found out that this was a mistake. They should have bought real estate. They should have borrowed money to buy real estate instead. Hello to Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator. Again, thank you for your work. Yes, the internet does have some value in terms of news, and Rowan Jacobson of Newsweek has recognized this. For most of last year, the idea that the coronavirus pandemic could have been triggered by a laboratory accident in Wuhan, China, was largely dismissed as a racist conspiracy theory of the alt-right. Alt-right? Golly, I haven't seen that expression in a while. The Washington Post in early 2020 accused Senator Tom Cotton of fanning the embers of a conspiracy theory that has been repeatedly debunked by experts. Yes, these people do not know what debunked means. They don't know what refuted means. It does not mean the same as rebutted. That is to say, people disagree with it. CNN jumped in with how to debunk coronavirus conspiracy theories and misinformation from friends and family. I don't know what, shout at them and tell them you're never going to darken their door again? Yeah, don't expect me at Thanksgiving or Christmas, you crazy people. Most other mainstream outlets, from the New York Times fringe theory to NPR, scientists debunk lab accident theory, were equally dismissive. Newsweek was an exception, reporting in April 2020 that the WIV was involved in gain-of-function research and might have been the site of a lab leak. Mother Jones, Business Insider, the New York Post, and Fox News were also exceptions. But in the last week or so, the story has burst into the public discourse. President Joe Biden has demanded an investigation by U.S. intelligence. And the mainstream media, in an astonishing about-face, is treating the possibility with deadly seriousness. The reason for the sudden shift in attitudes is clear. Over the weeks and months of the pandemic, the pileup of circumstantial evidence pointing to the Wuhan lab kept growing until it became too substantial to ignore. The people responsible for uncovering this evidence are not journalists or spies or scientists. They are a group of amateur sleuths with few resources except curiosity and a willingness to spend days combing the internet for clues. Throughout the pandemic, about 24 or so correspondents, many anonymous, working independently from many different countries, have uncovered obscure documents, pierced together the information, and explained it all in long threads on Twitter, in a kind of open source collective brainstorming session that was part forensic science, part citizen journalism, and entirely new. They call themselves Drastic for Decentralized Radical Autonomous Search Team Investigating COVID-19. For a long time, Drastic's discoveries stayed confined to the strange world of Twitter, known only to a few nerdy followers. The sleuths ran into a fair number of dead ends, got into the occasional spat with scientists who disagreed with their interpretations, and produced a fire hose of reporting. Gradually, the quality of their research and the rigor of their thinking drew a larger following, including many professional scientists and journalists. Thanks to Drastic, we now know that the Wuhan Institute of Virology had an extensive collection of coronaviruses gathered over many years of foraging in the bat caves, and that many of them, is that the worst possible job in the world? What, up to your knees in bat guano, looking for diseases? Ugh. Came from a mine shaft where 3 men died from a suspected SARS-like disease in 2012. We know that the WIV was actively working with these viruses using inadequate safety protocols in ways that could have triggered the pandemic, and that the lab and Chinese authorities have gone to great lengths to conceal these activities. We know that the first cases appeared weeks before the outbreak at the Hunan wet market that was once thought to be ground zero. Well, I will add this. It has been known for more than a year, 2 years perhaps, that there was a U.S. diplomatic investigation of the Wuhan Institute of Virology a few years ago, and the results were rather dire. A very low level of safety precaution taken there. This was public information. It's not secret, and the media could have considered that before they debunked the lab leak hypothesis, but no, they're just determined to stick to their narrative. None of this proves that the pandemic started in the Wuhan lab. Of course, it's entirely turn up unequivocal evidence one way or another, at least without the full cooperation of China, which is unlikely. But if they do, this small motley group of amateur sleuths will have broken what may be the biggest story of the 21st century. And it begins with a young Indian man who calls himself the Seeker, who is in his late 20s, lives somewhere in eastern India, and uses a piece of tribal art from his home region of West Bengal for his Twitter logo. Yes, the Newsweek story goes into some length about this. I won't recount it. You can find it easily enough, exclusive How Amateur Sleuths Broke Wuhan Lab story, and I recommend it. But the panic porn is not yet over. Here is Melissa Healy from the Los Angeles Times. As COVID-19 collides with HIV/AIDS, the pandemic may be taking on an ominous turn. Oh, COVID-19, HIV/AIDS, as Alan Partridge would say, and he once did, liquid AIDS. As the world's less affluent countries scramble for a COVID-19 vaccine and contend with deadly surges of the disease, researchers in South Africa have just documented an ominous development: the collision of the pandemic with HIV/AIDS. Geneticists and infectious disease specialists have uncovered potentially dangerous coronavirus mutations in a 36-year-old woman with uncontrolled HIV who was unable to shake the SARS-CoV-2 virus for close to 8 months. The driving force behind the patient's rapid accumulation of genetic changes is probably her impaired immune response due to her unsuccessfully treated HIV, the researchers said. The case highlights a difficult truth that affluent nations racing to vaccinate their own populations will remain vulnerable as long as the coronavirus is spreading and mutating in low and middle income countries where lack of vaccine has kept COVID-19 immunization rates low. That's especially true in countries like South Africa, where HIV infections are common but often undetected. Hey, do you remember the 1980s? Do you remember the 1990s when we were told that most of Southern Africa was going to be literally wiped out by AIDS? Never happened. Never happened. Perhaps because it was all made up. All made up. There was next to no HIV testing done in Southern Africa, but that didn't stop the panic porn merchants from screaming that they were all going to die. And I suppose it benefited the countries thereby because of all of the aid, the AIDS aid that flowed into the Southern African countries led by chief donor, United States of America. As Tom Bethel once said, AIDS seems less like a disease and more like a political program. Oh, I'm just going to go off topic here. You might remember that, I guess it was about a week ago, that I was talking about the CNN conservative commentator, Size E Cup, where she was rambling on about how much she loved TikTok because she's a cool mom. Yeah, she actually said that. And in particular, she was fond of one body positive TikToker who danced. And I'm wondering whether it is in fact this person. And this is a story from Yahoo News. The rise of Sienna Mae Gomez, the TikTok star who's been accused of sexually assaulting her ex-boyfriend, Jack Wright. TikToker Sienna Mae Gomez has recently denied allegations of sexual assault and verbal abuse. The 17-year-old star had a swift rise to fame, gaining millions of followers after a viral video. She was named one of TikTok's Latinx trailblazers in 2020. That's a much sought-after accolade, I must say. And as a partnership with Maybelline, Sienna Mae Gomez, the body-positive TikToker with over 21 million followers on her two TikTok accounts, has recently been embroiled in controversy following allegations that she sexually assaulted Jack Wright, another TikToker with 8.5 million followers, and Gomez's ex-background. Okay, what is this skinny blonde fellow doing with this obese, morbidly obese woman? Can you say synergy? Can you say perhaps made up? Okay. Yes, I'm going to have to check later to see whether Size E Cup has any comments on this shocking accusations. Oh, and of course, there's a Canadian role in the Wuhan disaster. This is from Robert Fife and Stephen Chase in the Globe and Mail. Whereabouts of two scientists fired from Winnipeg virus lab for possible national security issues shrouded in mystery. As Ottawa's explanation for their firing has shifted, Xinguo Qiu, a former head of a key program at the National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg, and her husband, Keting Cheng, have not publicly commented on why they were fired, nor have they responded to questions from the Globe and Mail about whether their dismissal was related to the transfer of highly infectious viruses to China's Wuhan Virology Institute. The Globe has found that the scientists are no longer living in Winnipeg, and it is unclear if they are still in Canada. The RCMP would not say if they know where the couple are located. Yes, ongoing investigation, blah, blah. The two scientists were removed from the lab in 2019, frog marched out, as they say, and fired in January 2021. The Public Health Agency of Canada has described the reasons for their departure as a policy breach and administrative matter and possible breaches of security protocols at the infectious disease lab, and it has declined to say more, citing privacy and security considerations. The Trudeau government, which wouldn't elaborate on what happened, has shifted emphasis as opposition MPs passed a motion this week to obtain uncensored records on why the two scientists were fired. The Conservatives, Bloc Québécois, and NDP also want to know if the dismissals are related to possible espionage or the transfer of two highly dangerous viruses to the Chinese lab in Wuhan. We will never jeopardize national security, says Health Minister Patty Hajdu. How exactly is it jeopardizing national security to ask about the whereabouts of two people fired at a laboratory which makes diseases which could, possibly wipe out the human race? It's not our business to know, apparently. No, also racist. Criticism of anyone from China or anyone related to China or anything like that is racist, and you should all be ashamed of yourselves. Haven't these people suffered enough with the model minority myth? We'll go to Lockdown Skeptics. More scaremongering from PHE about the twice as deadly Indian variant. The collapse of the lab leak censorship shows why it's dangerous to suppress free inquiry. Yes, indeed. Indeed, it is dangerous. But dangerous to who? Mostly. Dangerous to the people in charge? Dangerous to the regime media? Dangerous to the deep state? Douglas Murray has delivered one of his most skeptical pieces to date, lambasting the media for its skewed coverage of the pandemic, starting with the disgraceful silence over the mass protests and then taking aim at the kidults who run tech companies for their censorship of the lab leak theory. Also, Catherine Eban in Vanity Fair notes that researchers at the U.S. National Security Council had spotted that the engineered mice with humanized lungs, and we were all waiting for that, weren't we, that the WIV used for experiments with SARS-CoV-2 in early 2020 must have been engineered before the pandemic in the summer of 2019, leading to questions about the reason they were created and how dangerous were the experiments being done on them. France will welcome British tourists from June the 9th, but with a long list of terms and conditions. UK medicines regulator approves Pfizer vaccine for use in children aged 12 to 15. Fear of side effects, the main reason for vaccine hesitancy around the world, according to a new survey. Survey of 68,000 people led by Imperial College London's Institute of Global Health Innovation in collaboration with YouGov. Survey was carried out in Australia, Canada, Denmark, France, Germany, Israel, Italy, Japan, Norway, Singapore, South Korea, Spain, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Excluding eligibility, the top reasons for not having the vaccine across all countries surveyed were concern about side effects and/or concerns that there has not been enough testing of vaccines. Trust in vaccines was highest in the UK at 87% and lowest in Japan at 47%. Golly, I thought it was white Republicans who are the most hesitant. That's what the U.S. government has said, and the U.S. government has lied. As Dr. Carlson has pointed out, the racial group in the United States with the highest vaccine hesitancy, Black people, followed by Hispanic people. How about that, huh? German R number has no direct connection with lockdown, say researchers. I really long to live in a world where we're not going to hear about R numbers anymore. Or we could go a whole week without hearing from epidemiologists. SAGE member, SAGE is the group which advises the British government on COVID-19, says we must learn to live with COVID without the restrictions. Yeah, just like we learned to live with influenza without any restrictions. Let's go to Alex Berenson's Twitter feed. David Burge had tweeted, journalism is about covering important stories with a pillow until they stop moving. That's a tweet from 8 years ago. Berenson says, LOL, those were the good old days. Now it's more like shooting them in the back of the head and then billing the family for the round. You get it? See what he did there? That's a reference to communist China. Phil Kerpen had tweeted today's age 12 to 17 hospitalization edition of Does the CDC Read Their Own Website? Having to do with hospitalization of young people. Berenson comments, no, they didn't read their own mask review in February 2020, and they haven't read anything since. Bulletin from Dr. Anthony Fauci. I want a complete investigation of the origins of the virus. I so do, really. I mean it. I'm making this statement in good faith, and I'm sure the Chinese are listening seriously. Bulletin from Dr. Anthony Fauci. And someone wrote to Alex Berenson, can't make this up. First time I've ever had a post actively banned by Facebook. It was a screen cap of a Fauci email with minimal content. I was initially told it was misinformation. Yes, your post didn't follow our community standards. And the fellow responded, I promise this is the last thing I'll post about masks. Berenson comments, Facebook, maybe Fauci should tell Zuck. But seriously, the open alliance between big tech and government agencies on COVID raises all sorts of questions, especially this one. If Facebook is serving as an arm of government, why doesn't the First Amendment apply to it? Let's go to the chat. If the Marshal Service was involved, you can bet the victim was very dangerous, says Chogokin 666. Yeah, okay. Yeah, this is a very sad story that these people who get shot by the police, frequently there is a multi-million-dollar payout, regardless of innocent or guilt. Trayvon Martin's family, or should I say families, got a huge payout, despite the fact that his killer was found not guilty. This has become a de rigueur now. And I can't help but think that a fair number of people in the inner city are looking around, I don't know, at their relatives, their sons, thinking, yeah, which one of these fellows is going to pay off for me? Dan, yes, biological Fukushima. Texas Feral Hog says, I wonder if we haven't created a corrupt financial class willing to muck up the system for their own ultimate exclusive gain through moral hazard. Okay. Roulette Cracked says, Bob Geldof releasing a special version of his song, Burn the World. Don't they know it's Pride Month at all? Okay. He's a chubby chaser. Talking about the allegedly sexually abused blonde young man. Texas Feral Hog says they were never all going to die from AIDS. Their population was still supposed to expand. They were supposed to become tremendously unstable due to a hollowing of social institutions. Enron says, I want to live in a world where Fauci, Biden et al. Are eating out of garbage cans. Metal Mike says, I would love to live in a world in which I don't hear the word racialized. Well, my advice is whenever you hear this to say, who racialized them? Is there a committee? Is there some sort of government body? Is there a high council of white supremacy that is responsible for this? Quachalango says, don't think they would even let KMG do first or second reading in church. Too much feeling. The old school of readings, which you may still find in some monasteries, is that the readings were supposed to be given completely flat, completely deadpan. For this reason is that you're supposed to be listening to, scriptures and not to the actor. Marshall McLuhan, one of his keenest observations was in the 1960s, when they installed microphones for priests in churches, they were no longer priests, they became MCs. And of course, along with the microphones, we got priests thinking that they're funny, telling jokes. Too cringe. Too cringe. Steve says it's called the ghetto lottery. Okay. Chokokin666 says, I'm applying for racialization. Jay Miller says, Tony Fauci is the Larry Summers of Jack the Rippers. Okay, I'm going to talk about, before I get to that, let's have some civilization is crumbling news. This is just pure spite, absolute spite. And it just gives you an indication of just what a nasty man Joe Biden is. This is from Jeff Poor at Breitbart. Thursday, Governor Kristi Noem spoke about the Biden administration's decision to close Mount Rushmore for the 4th of July festivities, a contrast to a year earlier when then President Donald Trump spoke before a fireworks display. Why did they close down Mount Rushmore? Oh, because it's on sacred Indian territory and it's for dead, problematic white men. Also because normal patriotic Americans love Mount Rushmore. They're doing it because they can. In Memphis, some people are celebrating digging up the remains of General Nathan Bedford Forrest. This hatred and this racism is large and loud, says activist turned elected official Tammy Sawyer as she prepared to address reporters. And a man waved a Confederate flag behind her, pacing back and forth. He called the Shelby County commissioner a communist. Then he started singing Dixie, the anthem of the Old South. God bless you, loud, angry man. Oh, people, older people, or people particularly long memories, might remember New York in the 1970s and 1980s when it became a shithole, to use Donald Trump's formulation. Many people still believe that that New York City is a shithole, but it was cleaned up significantly after Rudy Giuliani became mayor. And the broken windows theory was practiced, but now, they don't do that anymore. This is from Fox 5 News in New York City. Vandals have been targeting storefronts and buildings with more and more graffiti in Soho, leaving local shop owners frustrated. Jack Applegate manages George Berge Gallery on West Broadway near Houston Street and started noticing more graffiti after the opportunistic looting that followed last summer's Black Lives Matter marches. 4 businesses on this block had their windows broken down. Applegate said, we were lucky. We had the metal that comes down. I think that's the only thing that saved us. For a business like an art gallery reliant on its large front windows to lure in passers-by, Applegate says that obscuring that view with spray paint can devastate a business until it gets the paint removed. Besides the damage to business, there's the damage to a collective psyche. I find few things more dispiriting than seeing buildings defaced with graffiti, like the building that I'm staying in now. If you go around to the back, it's covered with graffiti. It's all illiterate. God knows what it means. Well, some of it I've noticed is, obscene, but it just grinds one's spirit down. Yes, and in Who's on the Other Side news, this is from Jacob Bliss at Breitbart. Vulnerable Wisconsin Democrat Representative Ron Kind's wife, Tawny, recently liked a tweet of an Antifa sympathizer who responded to Republican Representative Nancy Mace's tweet regarding her home being vandalized with spray-painted Antifa graffiti. The tweet Tawny Kind liked recently included a graphic that said Antifa stands for anti-fascism. There is no organization called Antifa. World War II veterans were Antifa because they fought fascism. Yeah, okay. Of course, that's exactly what happened. Yes, she later removed the like. Apparently, her husband is involved in some massage parlor scandal. But Antifa, it's not just for Portland crazies. anymore. The Daily Mail is one of the few newspapers in the world which covers important political news, which the regime media has deemed to be not worthy of mention. Democrat lobbying firm linked to Hunter Biden and Burisma offered Ukrainian prosecutor access to the Clinton campaign in 2016, Obama's State Department official emails shows. Former Ukrainian Prosecutor General Yuri Lutsenko said he had been approached by Blue Star Strategies in 2016 to help with trip to Washington, D.C. The film was working for the energy company Burisma, which included Hunter Biden as a board member. In an email record, State Department official George Kent said Lutsenko said he had been pitched by Blue Star. The firm offered him access to high levels of the Clinton campaign. Lutsenko was investigating Konstantin Klimnik, an associate of Paul Manafort, former Trump campaign chairman at the time. Oh, yes. In oligarchy, Bloomberg again. Yes. I save a URL in Microsoft Word, and then I attempt to open it, and that constitutes suspicious activity as far as they're concerned. But now here it is. This is from Peter Coy. The bottom 9% of Americans are, the bottom 90% of Americans are borrowing from the top 1%. The savings of the rich are recycled into household and government debt. We know three things about the U.S. economy. The rich are getting richer, everyone else is in debt, and interest rates have fallen. Is there a connection? Yes, and the link has implications for fiscal and monetary policy. By forcing interest rates down, extreme wealth inequality pushes the U.S. economy toward a debt trap that's hard to escape with conventional macroeconomic tools, right? Atif Mian of Princeton, Ludwig Straub of Harvard, and Amir Sufi of the University of Chicago. In an important paper that came out earlier this year titled Indebted Demand, they advocate unconventional measures such as redistributive tax policies that narrow the gap between rich and poor. The paper is in the same vein as work by former Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke, who publicized the concept of a global savings glut. It was the Ben Bernanke who gave us ZIRP, zero interest rates policy, forever. Did he not know what this would lead to? Here's the concept. The rich can't possibly spend everything they earn, so they save a lot. In theory, those savings can be recycled into productive investment, but in practice, a lot of the money finances borrowing, i.e. desaving by people farther down the income ladder. A substantial amount of borrowing by households in the bottom 90% of the wealth distribution was financed through the accumulation of financial assets by the top 1%, the economists write. The lending from rich to poor can be indirect. For example, let's say a rich person buys shares issued by a company. The company stashes the proceeds in a bank. The bank in turn makes a loan to a non-rich person to buy a car or a house. The borrowers have a higher propensity to spend than the lenders, but they have less money to spend because part of their income goes to debt service. The excess of desired savings over desired investment pushes interest rates down and down until the effective lower bound of around zero. Rates can't get much below zero because savers won't tolerate it. They'd rather put the money under a mattress than earn a negative return on it. Yes, it's like Trump said in 2016, Hillary Clinton, she gets rich by making you poor, and the 1% gets rich by, or richer rather, by making the bottom 90% poorer. And so I found this story amusing by Penny Starr at Breitbart. The San Francisco mayor, London Breed, wants to spend $1 billion to fight homeless epidemic. And how is that going to be fought? The mayor wants to create 6,000 housing placements by June 2022, which includes new permanent supportive housing units, adding more housing vouchers, or buying people bus tickets out of town to go back to family and friends. The funding would also cover another 4,000 new housing placements by 2023 and help prevent potential homelessness and eviction for over 7,000 households. So in other words, San Francisco plans to adopt the Victoria model, in which you take all the homeless, crazy, criminal, drug addicted people and put them all in one place and stash them around the city. They're not going to publicize where these places are because no one would want to go near them. Richard Hanania writes on Substack, woke institutions is just civil rights law. Why conservatives won't and can't fight for influence and what to do about it. Follow up to why is everything liberal and 2016 the turning point. Liberals control institutions because they care more about politics, a disparity that grew larger around 2016. This makes attempts to use government, i.e. bureaucracy, to take back the culture unlikely to succeed, at least in the short term. What should conservatives do then? I'm talking about the anti-woke portion of conservatism, which increasingly seems to be the most animated part of the movement. This post is not meant to be advice for gun people, abortion people, or low-tax people. Those parts of the rights have figured out how to have influence and are doing relatively well. The good news is that there can be an anti-wokeness agenda just as easily as there can be a low-tax agenda and a pro-gun rights agenda. People have generally misunderstood wokeness as a purely cultural phenomenon. It does have a cultural component, of course, but it is important to also understand wokeness as something that has been law in the United States for the last half century. The triumph of this ideology over the last 10 years in public discourse is simply culture catching up to law. To reverse what has happened, one needs to know a little bit of the history and how every major institution of the company in the country came to act and think in the exact same way. It's not an exaggeration to say that the animating focus of the political right today is cancel culture. It was practically the main theme of the RNC in 2020, and the 2021 CPAC conference's motto was America Uncanceled. I sympathize with critiques of cancel culture, or PC, or cultural Marxism, or wokeness, or whatever you want to call it. Yet it's clear to me, Hanania writes, that the political movement devoted to fighting this ideological matrix is quite short on policy ideas. This critique has been made mostly by leftists, with one amusing chart showing that while the Democrats were passing the biggest stimulus bill in history, Fox News gave more airtime to the emasculation of Mr. Potato Head. The canceling of Dr. Seuss led to a similarly hysterical reaction. If the left is going on about healthcare, for example, it's usually because they want some new bill or policy. But it was difficult to see what those talking about Dr. Seuss or Mr. Potato Head actually wanted. Wokeness is government policy, Hanania insists. And he proceeds to lay out a plan to oppose this, to make it a lobby, much in the way of the anti-abortion lobby or the gun rights lobby. And this is an excellent idea. So I will just commend to you Richard Hanania's Substack. Wokeness is extraordinarily unpopular. And if the right, the genuine right, cannot garner political victories out of this, well, then they're useless. I mean, we know they're useless, but presumably, seeing as wokeness wants to eliminate them entirely, I think this is it's really a case of self-preservation more than anything else. And Glenn Greenwald writes that the new domestic war on terror has already begun, even without the new laws Biden wants. Now, the Biden talked in Tulsa about how white supremacism was the greatest domestic terror threat in the United States. This is fantastically wrong. But no, Joe Biden, old white rich guy who's been in elected office, well, federal elective office since 1973. Yes, is determined to, I don't know. He's determined to destroy everything. I mean, he doesn't have much to live. So, what does he care? Why does he care? What did white people ever do for Joe Biden? And, I quite like this. I don't know whether you've heard of David Hockney. He is a painter. He is regularly regarded and affirmed in polls as the greatest living Briton. He writes in Unheard, I will be 84 next month, even though I have smoked since I was 16. I started with 5 Woodbines. Now I smoke Davidoff Magnums, which I have to get from Germany. I recently told my doctor I smoke 20 a day, then about 10 in the evenings, and I try to keep it down to 5 during the night. I also told him that I've had 3 doctors in the last 50 years. Each of them recommended I give up, but each of them has now died. The last one only a year older than me. My new doctor laughed and said nothing. He has a good sense of humor. My father was a very keen anti-smoker, but he died at 75 because he ate too many chocolate biscuits. He was a diabetic who would walk up the street to buy a packet of chocolate biscuits and then eat them all in the park. This caused him to go into comas, which he did once too often, and died of a heart attack in the hospital. He knew that going into a coma damages your heart, but he was a lot more worried about these smokers. I knew that this was completely irrational, but I also knew that he wasn't alone. One of the reasons, Hockney writes, I moved to Normandy was because there are many people in England like him who are now trying to ban smoking. All of them are humorless bossy boots. They are now trying it in Oxfordshire, which wants to become England's first smoke-free county. I have no plans to go there. I was once invited by the Oxford Union to a debate on smoking, but I had to decline because of my deafness. Although I did point out that there's not a hotel in Oxford where you can smoke. It's the relentlessness of these people that has demonized smoking in England and America. Why are they listened to? It wouldn't happen in France, Germany, Italy, or Spain. The Guardian published a report last week about how there are now 1.1 billion smokers in the world, but it also mentioned that 8 million had died from smoking and how terrible that was. I had to remind them that 8 million was 0.73% of 1.1 billion, so what about the 99.27% that hadn't? It's all madness to me and something that should be said, Hockney continues. I've always thought the world to be mad, and it has been madder at other points in my lifetime. I was, after all, born in 1937. I would normally be willing to take on the anti-smokers, but at the moment I'm living a very quiet life in Normandy, working away because I've something to do. I have a purpose in life. Not many people in England will defend smoking. They are intimidated by the medical profession and social pressure. Well, I'm lucky I can't hear the social pressure, let alone what the doctors have to say. Their obsession with health is unhealthy. Longevity shouldn't be an aim in life. That, to me, seems to be life-denying. I know the World Health Organization is also part of this madness. They might relentlessly go on about it, but why are they listened to? They are completely irrational. They won't give up, just like my father. In my profession, Picasso smoked and died at 91. Matisse smoked and died at 84, and Monet chain smoked and died at 86. I don't smoke much when I'm painting, but I light a cigarette every 15 minutes when I stop to check what I have done. Monet smoked while he painted, but kept them in his mouth all the time. I can't do that. I take a drag, then hold it in my hand. Renoir also smoked. If you go on YouTube and type in Renoir smoking and painting, you will see an old man painting with difficulty because of his arthritic hands. And then he lights a cigarette. I can tell he enjoys it enormously, and all these bossy boots would deny him that pleasure. I know there will always be bossy people. Anne Applebaum says that 30% of people in every country have an authoritarian disposition. But doesn't she just mean bossy? Smoking for me is a deep pleasure, and 1.1 billion people in the world seem to agree. It can never be stopped. Smokers would just start growing their own tobacco. But we need more people to defend it, otherwise the bossy boots will win in England. I'm 100% sure that I'm going to die of a smoking-related illness or a non-smoking-related illness. But I couldn't imagine not smoking, and when people tell me to stop, I always point this out. I've done it for 68 years, so are you telling me I'm doing something wrong? Fuck off. Laugh a lot. It clears the lungs, concludes David Hockney. I should point out that in the late 1990s, the World Health Organization commissioned a big study on the risks of secondhand smoke. And this study concluded that there were no risks associated with secondhand smoke, and the WHO then suppressed the study. And you should still be able to find that if you search for this on in the London Telegraph. I should also mention that today is the 80th birthday of the great classical pianist Martha Argerich, who is a champion smoker. Happy birthday, Martha Argerich. Let's go to the chat before I delve into the residential schools question. Okay. Okay, we will go here. Yes, graffiti is vulgar and depressing. A city that isn't right on top of that is going to be in trouble. Anran says, I agree, but I support the graffitiing of all brutalist architecture. Dan Ellison says, I just bulldoze the brutalist stuff. That would be one of the ways in which we know that we had won, because brutalist architecture is as distressing to me as graffiti, perhaps even more so. My God, what were these people thinking? Again, is it spite? Is it hatred of beauty? Is it hatred of mankind that leads to modern architecture? Oh, Jay Miller says maybe people are finally figuring out that massive deficit spending leads to a wider gap in inequality that only benefits the top 5%. Dan Allison says down here we have these murals painted on the buildings, just as ugly. Well, I have a saying about murals, that murals are a signifier. And what they signify is you do not want to live here. I mean, check it out. It's almost universally true. And Coachalango, Florida or Asheville, Georgia, North Carolina border. Okay. I saw that Jack Hawkins, who was in last night's movie, used to smoke 60 cigarettes a day until it caught up with him, says Anwan. Yes, he lost his voice entirely. Well, he could still speak, but not in a manner that anyone would want to hear in a movie. So his last few movies were dubbed. Quachalango says, I missed the guy in the 8-page color insert of Guinness Book of World Records who stuffed his mouth with cigarettes. Which Coen Brothers movie has Kevin done on Theater Thursday? I did the latest one, the Netflix one. What was it called? The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. And I must have done another one, but it doesn't come to mind. Jim Smith says, about 20 years ago, I read an article about the oldest woman in the world who had just died at the age of 117 in France. Among other things, she said she had stopped smoking at the age of 111. Doranol says, honestly, I can't stand the smoke, so thankful it's not in restaurants any longer. Tricky Who says, smoking cigarettes is good, although I quit again a few years ago. It's gotten me through some bad times. It's curious times that we live in. Marijuana, nothing wrong with that. Even this high-strength stuff, which turns people psycho. But smoking, as we learned from Silicon Valley, is worse than heroin. Because as that Bossy Boots, who ran the investment company, said, nobody ever died from secondhand heroin. Okay, on to residential schools. Which is, Canada seems to be consumed with it. Actually, our elite class is consumed with it, and we're all going to have to suffer as a result. Residential schools, in the 19th century, the government decided that in order to improve the lives of Indians, they would be educated away from their tribes. Taught English, taught the things that were taught in white people's schools. They would also be taught trades, etc., etc. And now it's been denounced for several years as a Holocaust, a very curious kind of genocide that we see in Canada, where the population of Native Indians is, well, growing, and it keeps growing. As a percentage of the population keeps growing and growing and growing. Let's see. One of the largest residential schools in Canada was in Kamloops, which is in the interior of British Columbia, according to Wikipedia, with enrollment peaking at 500 in the 1950s. The school was established in 1890 and was in operation until 1969. when taken over by the federal government from the Catholic Church, the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, who were great men who often traveled thousands of miles and lived in often desperate conditions in order to minister to the heathen. So the school closed in 1978. So that is 1890 to 1978. That is 88 years. School building still stands today and is located on the, the Kamloops. The Kamloops Indian Band. I'm not going to attempt the ridiculous phony language they've come up with. In May 2021, the remains of 215 children buried in unmarked graves were confirmed to have been found at the site. Not true. Liberals' mum, this is from America Walsh at the Globe and Mail, Liberals' mum on support for NDP motion to accelerate work tracking unmarked graves. Yes. Last week, the Kamloops First Nation announced that the bodies of 215 children were found in unmarked graves at the former Kamloops residential school. Oh, really? Is that what happened? That's what the media has been telling us. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is making a renewed push for the federal government to take concrete steps toward reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, calling on Ottawa to drop a pair of federal court appeals he says represent a belligerent approach to justice for First Nations children. Children, eh? The Liberal government is appealing a Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruling ordering Canada to pay $40,000 each to some 50,000 First Nations children separated from their families by a chronically underfunded child welfare system. Well, that's one way to put it. I knew a woman who was part of what they called the 60s swap. And this woman was being kept in deplorable, possibly even criminal conditions by her mother, and a nice white family adopted her. Let's see, Jean Chrétien, former Prime Minister of Canada, he was part of the 60s swap, adopted an Indian boy. David Frum's mother, Barbara Frum, and her husband Murray, same thing, adopted an Indian boy. And Ted Byfield, the founder of the Report magazines, where I worked for a decade, same thing, 60 swap, adopted an Indian boy. And apparently this was monstrous. So they get 40 grand each, or so says the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. Here is the first, or one of the very first media reports of this sensational story. It is by Courtney Dixon and Bridget Watson of the CBC. Remains of 250 children found buried at former BC residential school, First Nation says. Okay. Preliminary findings from a survey of the grounds at the former Kamloops Indian residential school have uncovered the remains of 215 children buried at the site, the Kamloops First Nation said Thursday. The First Nation said the remains were confirmed last week near the city of Kamloops in BC's southern interior. In a statement, the Indian Band said it hired a specialist in ground-penetrating radar to carry out the work, and that its language and culture department oversaw the project to ensure it was done in a culturally appropriate and respectful way. The release did not specify the company or individual involved or how the work was completed. To our knowledge, these missing children are undocumented deaths, the chief of the band said. Some were as young as 3 years old. Oh, really, Roseanne? Is that what the radar told you? What were 3-year-olds doing in a residential school? Casimir told the CBC the findings are preliminary and a report will be provided by the specialist next month. Then we have a story from Alex Boyd and Alex McKean of the Toronto Star. This radar technology helped find the burial site of 215 children in Kamloops, BC. Could it find others? Yes, ground-penetrating radar, and there is a picture of this device being dragged across a field. Digital maps, along with the radar that is used to evaluate the soil below, are the most common tools in this kind of work, says Kisha Supernaut, a director of the Institute of Prairie and Indigenous Archaeology at the University of Alberta. Her team has used these techniques on an unmarked ceremony outside a former residential school in Saskatchewan, as well as at other Indigenous burial sites. One of the first things our team does is use sensors mounted on drones that survey the area. Notable characteristics such as depressions in the ground or changes in the vegetation can sometimes indicate burial locations. The ground-penetrating radar is then brought in. There is an antenna in a box shape around the size of a lawnmower that you drag along the ground as it shoots a signal into the earth. It's not like an X-ray for the ground that shows you a simple picture of what's beneath the surface. Rather, it is able to detect disruptions in the soil that her team must then interpret. Okay? What it's looking for is actually the pit that was dug when the grave was placed. And if it was coffin burial, sometimes it will reflect off of a cotton. It does not actually see the body. If it cannot actually see the body, how would it know that there were 3-year-olds in this mass grave? Well, let's go to the original, the actual report from the Kamloops Indian Band. This is from the Office of the Chief, May the 27th. Heavy heart, unthinkable loss, ground-penetrating radar specialist, stark truth. Okay. How do we know that this is the truth? How do we know? The 215. Okay. The Kamloops Band will continue to work with ground-penetrating radar specialists to complete the survey of the former Kamloops Indian residential school grounds. In undertaking the current investigation, they would like to acknowledge preliminary work that was carried out in the early 2000s. Okay. Guess what is not going to happen here? Please note that the Heritage Park is closed to the public and no one will be permitted on site for the duration of this sensitive work. How very convenient. Guess what there's not going to be? There is not going to be an evacuation of this supposed burial site. So we're going to have to depend upon this interpretation of radar. I suppose, if you want to find out if people are buried somewhere, you dig it up. And if you find bones, then you have found a grave site. And you have, yes, I want to read this specifically. The work was undertaken by the Kamloops Language and Culture Department with ceremonial knowledge keepers who ensured that the work was conducted respectfully in light of the serious nature of the investigation, with cultural protocols being upheld. So no disinterment. No disinterment. We have a report, a very interesting report on this science, where are the children buried, from Dr. Scott Hamilton of the Department of Anthropology at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, Ontario. And if you search for radar, you find some interesting things. You find that it's rather tricky. It is rather tricky indeed. Cemetery mapping can also involve near-surface geophysical techniques that include ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity or conductivity, and magnetic gradiometer surveys. Each of these approaches involves systematic evaluation of the survey area using a control grid. Each type of instrument measures some characteristic of the ground at locations defined by the coordinate system. Changes in these characteristics might reflect normal and natural variation in the sediment, or alternatively, some indication of human modification, such as a grave. By systematically plotting these geophysical characteristics, the analyst seeks to non-invasively detect their pattern distribution and then interpret their origin function. While much more complicated than presented here, under the right conditions, these approaches can detect unmarked graves. However, these methods seldom produce results that are immediately and intuitively interpretable, and often require supplemental evaluation. The survey methodology must be designed after considering the size scale of the features being sought, and also the site circumstances. Finally, the targets or anomalies detected by these methods must also be subjected to post-survey validity testing, ground truthing, to help confirm their nature. Ground-penetrating radar survey involves transmitting a radar beam into the earth and measuring the time interval before those beams are reflected back to the instrument. Put simply, the greater the time interval before the radar beam returns, the greater the depth of the detected unconformity. These returns might reflect natural changes in sedimentary texture or alternatively, culturally derived unconformities, obstructions, or voids. Yes. So it is, as I say, it is not that simple at all. If you wanted to know how many bodies were in this mass grave, then you would excavate. But the Indian band is not going to do that because of cultural sensitivity or whatever. How did these people die? Well, I guess, we'll let an examine. I suppose perhaps the examination of some of the bones could have determined how they died, but that's not going to be done either. The media has pretty much adopted a position that the members of the Oblates of Mary Immaculate must have murdered these children. They're pretty close to saying that. So one, we have no idea how many people are buried there or how they died. But it's trebles all around for the Indian grievance industry, because a lot more money than is already thrown at them is going to be thrown at them. And we're going to get more and more apologies, including presumably an apology for Canada actually existing. Some creep called Max Fawcett in National Observer, who I've spoken of before, Jason Kenney hates cancel culture. Is that because he knows he'll eventually get canceled? Kenney had made remarks to the effect that he didn't believe that pretty much every Canadian politician of the 19th century should be canceled. He said, if the new standard is to cancel any figure in our history associated with what we now rightly regard as historical injustices, then essentially that is the vast majority of our history. Yeah, this is true enough. So let's see. Kenney isn't the only person in his orbit who hasn't updated their thinking on this issue. Chris Champion, who I'll confess I worked with at Alberta Report, the historian and former Conservative staffer who Kenney tapped to help write the social studies component of Alberta's controversial new K-6 curriculum, also doubled down on his pre-existing beliefs in the wake of the Kamloops discovery. In a Twitter exchange, the Dorchester Review, the journal Champion founded and edits, suggested that Indigenous children were at residential schools like the one in Kamloops because in many cases their parents wanted them there. This is why this should be based on research, not the politics and cashola of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Comments like that reflect the bias that Champion and others in Kenney's inner circle, including former speechwriter Paul Bunner, who once described the residential school system as a bogus genocide story, consistently show on this issue. Well, I also worked with Paul Bunner at the Report for about a decade. Paul Bunner has an adopted Indian child. Alberta Report took a keen interest in the residential school story and was subject to a Alberta Human Rights Commission complaint about this. Yes. Why is this happening now? Well, because people want to get paid off. They've already been paid off many times, but they want to get paid off again. Keep going back to that well. Elwyn Ransom writes in the Council of European Canadians website, every white nation a Holocaust. Holocaust envy. Yes. And I think that this is absolutely true. He writes, every white nation has thus been given a Holocaust narrative. The Americans have slavery, the French and English have colonialism, the Belgians have the Congo, the Spanish have their civil war and Franco, Canada has the residential school system. Every predominantly white country has its own atrocity myth to perpetuate a local and universalized white guilt. Since Canada, America, and so on have sinned, we therefore cannot criticize Germany for the Holocaust because in the end, all white people are the same and are naturally predisposed to oppressing and exterminating non-whites, and thus we all stand guilty and must atone. Yeah. And the story from that same site from 2015 by Thomas Jones, which I recommend to you. You can find it at eurocanadian.ca. This report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission basically adopts the position that every inch square inch of Canada belongs to Native Indians. Never mind the fact that what we call Canada is entirely the creation of European colonists. Entirely. And, oh, yes, we're going to talk about money. This is from a few years ago. Well, as of 2020, the Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada spent $9,056 per registered First Nations person. That's just one federal department. Health Canada spending $26.26 per Indian in 2012, and there's education spending, and that's just the money that Indians in Canada get from the federal government, not counting what they get from provincial governments. If you add them together, we're looking at about what, $13,000-$14,000 per head per Indian per year. But it's never enough. It is never enough. And I will just repeat, when you read this story again and again of these 200 plus Indians, including as young as 3, found buried in a mass grave, it's not true, because there is no evidence, and there will never be any evidence, because the site will never be excavated, because the Indians will not allow it for obvious reasons. According to the post-millennial, Trudeau, that's Prime Minister Trudeau, says as a Catholic, he is deeply disappointed by position Catholic Church has taken on residential schools. Yes, he is demanding that the Pope apologize. When I went to the Vatican a number of years ago, I directly asked His Holiness Pope Francis to move forward on apologizing, on asking for forgiveness, on restitution, on making these records available. We're still seeing resistance from the church, possibly from the church in Canada. Well, it wasn't just the Catholic Church. It was the Anglican Church and the United Church as well. Oh, and let's hear from the Titus Oates of Canada, Michael Coren. Should the Catholic Church lose its charitable tax status? Oh, he's just rubbing his paws, thinking about this. Yes, and let's hear some concerned trolling from the loathsome Michael Coren. I was a Roman Catholic for many years. He is now an Anglican priest. Loves so much in that church, loves so many people in it, both laity and clergy. This criticism is not for the 40% of Canadians who are Catholic, nor for individual priests, but for the hierarchy, the patriarchy of the church, both in Canada and in Rome. They must listen. Well, I can't imagine why anyone would want to listen to Michael Coren on any question, especially theology. He wrote a book. See, here's what happened. Michael Coren made a lot of money as an official or semi-official Catholic in Canada, and especially in the United States. And it turns out that his beliefs had changed radically. They've changed many, many times in his life. He was not a religious man. Then he became a Catholic, and he dumped Catholicism for Pentecostalism and regularly denounced the Catholic Church at that time. Then he went back to the Catholic Church. Then he abandoned the Catholic Church for the Anglican Church because of, abortion. He's just fine with abortion now, and especially the gays. Michael Coren loves the gays. And in the book he wrote about this. In the book he wrote about this, his spiritual Aeneid in reverse, he actually had the audacity to quote a Catholic priest who suggested that, it's just the Catholic Church is so mean to gay people, and that explains why we molest children. I am not making this up. What a loathsome, loathsome man. Actually, I might run a little overtime today, but I wanted to get in some Hilar Belloc here. We're going to talk about the stable solutions to the instability of capitalism. Given a capitalist state, of its nature unstable, it will tend to reach stability by some method or another. It is the definition of unstable equilibrium that a body in an unstable equilibrium is seeking a stable equilibrium. For instance, a pyramid balanced upon its apex is in unstable equilibrium, which simply means that a slight force one way or the other will make it fall into a position where it will repose. Similarly, certain chemical mixtures are said to be in unstable equilibrium when their constituent parts have such affinity one for another that a slight shock may make them combine and transform the chemical arrangement of the whole. Of this sort are explosives. If the capitalist state is in unstable equilibrium, this only means that it is seeking a stable equilibrium and that capitalism cannot but be transformed into some other arrangement wherein society may repose. There are but three social arrangements which can replace capitalism: slavery, socialism, and property. I may imagine a mixture of any two of these three or of all of the three, but each is a dominant type. And from the very nature of the problem, no fourth arrangement can be devised. The problem turns, remember, upon the control of the means of production. Capitalism means that this control is vested in the hands of few, while political freedom is the appanage of all. If this anomaly cannot endure from its insecurity and from its own contradiction with its presumed moral basis, you must either have a transformation of the one or the other of the two elements which combined have been found unworkable. The two factors are: one, the ownership of the means of production by a few; two, the freedom of all. To solve capitalism, you must get rid of restricted ownership, or of freedom, or of both. Now, there is only one alternative to freedom, which is the negation of it. Either a man is free to work and not to work as he pleases, or he may be liable to a legal compulsion to work backed by the forces of the state. In the first, he is a free man. In the second, he is by definition a slave. We have therefore, so far as this factor of freedom is concerned, no choice between a number of changes, but only the opportunity of one, to wit, the establishment of slavery in place of freedom. Such a solution, the direct, immediate, and conscious reestablishment of slavery, would provide a true solution of the problems which capitalism offers. It would guarantee, under workable regulations, sufficiency and security for the dispossessed. Such a solution, as I shall show, is the probable goal which our society will in fact approach. To its immediate and conscious acceptance, however, there is an obstacle. A direct and conscious establishment of slavery as a solution to the problem of capitalism, the surviving Christian tradition of our civilization compels men to reject. No reformer will advocate it. No prophet dares take it as yet for granted. All theories of reformed society will therefore attempt, at first, to leave untouched the factor of freedom among the elements which make up capitalism, and will concern themselves with some change in the factor of property. Now, in attempting to remedy the evils of capitalism by remedying that one of its two factors which consists in an ill distribution of property, you have two and only two courses open to you. If you are suffering because property is restricted to a few, you can alter that factor in the problem either by putting property in the hands of many or by putting it in the hands of none. There is no third course. In the concrete, to put property in the hands of none means to vest it as a trust in the hands of political officers. If you say that the evils proceeding from capitalism are due to the institution of property itself and not to the dispossession of the many by the few, then you must forbid the private possession of the means of production by any particular and private part of the community, but someone must control the means of production, or we should have nothing to eat. So in practice, this doctrine means the management of the means of production by those who are the public officers of the community. Whether these public officers are themselves controlled by the community or no has nothing to do with the solution on the economic side. The essential point to grasp is that the only alternative to private property is public property. Somebody must see to the plowing and must control the plows. Otherwise, no plowing will be done. It is equally obvious that if you conclude property in itself to be evil, but only the small number of its owners, then your remedy is to increase the number of those owners. So much being grasped, we may recapitulate and say that a society like ours, disliking the name of slavery and avoiding a direct and conscious reestablishment of the slave status, will necessarily contemplate the reform of its ill-distributed ownership on one of two models. The first is the negation of private property and the establishment of what is called collectivism. That is, the management of the means of production by the political officers of the community. The second is the wider distribution of property until that institution shall become the mark of the whole state, or until free citizens are normally found to be the possessors of capital, of land, or both. And we will return to Hilaire Belloc on Monday. Before I move to the book club, I want to refer to an essay by Lamprey Milt, who I know occasionally listens to this live stream, which appears in the American Sun. This appeared yesterday, called Caveat Emptor. This past April, Bitcoin reached a market cap of $2.3 trillion, which is the equivalent of 1/5 of the US economy, and we watched it plummet to 1.5 trillion at the tail end of May. Those who have been crypto enthusiasts are used to the volatile crypto market, and millionaires have been minted overnight. For them, I say congratulations, but this is by no means normal or healthy for an economy. This article might be redundant for some, but many people are in the fear of missing out stage and looking to buy on this latest pullback. So I figured it would be good to share some newbie thoughts. Back in January 2018, my friend bought $500,000 of Bitcoin at $14,000. We engaged in a debate and argued back and forth, with him explaining to me why it's an excellent investment, and I was playing devil's advocate, wanting to be a wet blanket on why Bitcoin is foolish and worthless. I'm not going to lie, says Lamprey Milt. I traded crypto and did very well in 2017 and decided to watch from the sidelines in 2020 and 21. I traded in and out of the grayscale trusts after I was burned by Coinbase, which had my account frozen for 6 months, forcing me to spam Coinbase into releasing my gains. They released it not at the price I put my initial sell in at. It's funny seeing how Coinbase is now publicly traded without having proper customer support. It was exciting to shoot group text messages with friends about how we will ride around on the moon in Lambos and sending gifts of Saturn V rockets back and forth. And then he looks at some of the blockchain plays, miner scams, and shitcoins surrounding the first run in the crypto market. MGT Capital Investments was pumped while having John McAfee on its board of directors. It shot up to a high of $8 a share in 2018. Today, it sits below 5 cents after monster dilution. Riot Blockchain changed its company's name 3 times in the past before jumping in on the crypto blockchain electrolyte craze. Yes, its mailing address was located in a strip mall. Kodak, a name lost in the sands of time, launched Kodak Coin. Upon its announcement, Kodak's stock price tripled in 2 days as its market valuation increased by more than 300%. Yet by the end of the month, 1/3 of Kodak shares were trading short, and Kodak was again forgotten. Longfin Corporation, which came out of the Job Acts with Singapore with its executives from India and less than 10 employees, went from $5 to $140 on a short squeeze, gaining a market cap of over $6 billion. The cryptocurrency they had called Zidu completed only one transaction from what everyone can tell, and nobody can tell exactly what this company did. The absolute lack of shame and morals for being a downright crook is enough for me to wonder what other characters came under the Jobs Act. YouTube content creator turned grifter Chris Cantu created Red Pill Coin and scammed many of his followers and is now in hiding. Long Blockchain Corp, a firm out of Long Island, whose main business was bottling iced tea, decided to join the blockchain orgy fest in 2017. Its company stock skyrocketed nearly 300%. And later was prompting a full-blown FBI investigation and arrests. My main argument is that Bitcoin has no underlying value, and no blockchain technology is not its underlying value. It holds no assets, no real estate, no patents, no know-how, no machinery, no supplies, no raw materials, no finished products, and no future income expectation. So far, the fair market value of Bitcoin is the price it is trading at. Furthermore, Bitcoin value has no bottom. It could literally hit zero, which other investment assets rarely do. During the course of that year, Bitcoin dropped from a high of nearly 20,000 to a low of just over 3,100. And then his friend told about the probably fictitious person called Satoshi Nakamoto, and how revolutionary cryptocurrency is that it is saving lives in Venezuela. The underlying value created for crypto is the cost to mine it, said his friend. My response was, if Bitcoin were an asset that we could strip, if the crypto market were to tank, you would be able to salvage at least the value of the electricity and computing power. This cost would have some bearing on rock bottom price. Spoiler alert, we cannot recoup this. This electricity is simply money lost. So it does not represent value that can be obtained by holders of Bitcoin. Those are sunk costs. If the price of Bitcoin reaches zero, you can't trade it in for electricity. Another argument against Bitcoin having intrinsic value is that when Bitcoin was trading above $4,758, the average cost of mining in 2018, none of the pro-Bitcoin pumpers were calling the asset overvalued. The pro-Bitcoin shills were not calling for a market correction, neither did they advise investors to wait until the price dropped before buying more. Instead, they predicted that the price would increase further and that investors should hurry up and buy by now to not be left out on the massive appreciation. The supply of Bitcoin could be argued from two positions. One is that the supply of Bitcoin is fixed because there is a predetermined and finite number of coins which can be created, 21 million. If this is the case, then the supply of Bitcoin cannot be responsible for the tremendous drops in price. What about cryptocurrency being a safe asset when the market crashes or during corrections? Go look at BTC stock chart when the scandemic hit. Sorry, no, I didn't say that. No, erase that. No. COVID-19 hit February and March of 2020. Did Bitcoin go to the moon? No, it crashed on its face from $10,375 to $4,000. It followed the overall market trend. At one point, I was using Bitcoin as a future market indicator for the Dow Jones Index, S&P 500, and altcoins, but this is no longer the case. People pull cash out of all markets during a crisis. They do not put money into it. Gold and silver have never been traded during an economic collapse. Governments just issue new forms of tenure, and if we were ever to go back to trading gold and silver, we would be dealing with much bigger problems that are unimaginable. We can conclude that Bitcoin and altcoins have no underlying asset value and that the only value of them is the current market price. Yes. Now, I used to write about the mining industry. I used to write a lot about gold and silver. And I suppose that the enthusiasm for Bitcoin has replaced the former enthusiasm for gold and silver, although there are still gold bugs around. Now, gold and silver have intrinsic value. Gold, because it is pretty, but people have valued gold for being pretty for a long, long time. Silver is pretty too, not as pretty as gold, but it has industrial value. About 60% of silver is used in industrial applications. Of course, Bitcoin is intrinsically worthless. But of course, I used to read a lot about and discuss the question of, the economic collapse. Okay, so there's an economic collapse, and so you have your gold and silver. Well, do you have it in actual form, or is it in a proxy account? Because if it's in a proxy account, well, you're screwed, aren't you? What about if you have it in a vault? People store gold in vaults. Are you going to be able to get to the bank or elsewhere and get your gold? Now, what are you going to do with it exactly? How are you going to use it to buy things? That's assuming that the vault, the holder of your gold, actually has it and that it has not been hypothecated or re-hypothecated, as they say. Lamprey, I used to hear these people, read about these people talking about gold going to $3,000 an ounce or even $10,000 an ounce. If gold went to $10,000 an ounce, to reuse an old Oberyn joke, people would be fighting to the death over dead rats in the street. So a final look at the chat before I go to the book club. Edie Wolf says Bitcoin's intrinsic value is that cannot be censored. And dentistry, says Chogokin 666. Yes. Leponius Maximus Meridia says I buy gold certificates from Alex Jones. Hello to our old friend Ricardo Williams. I'm going to miss Dr. Fauci. He says, I suppose, what impressed me about Fauci is just how vital he is for an 80-year-old man. It's truly impressive. He is. I guess he's proof if you look after yourself, you don't have to be a physical wreck. Well, who else will the object of my consternation and ire be? Asked Ricardo Williams. Oh, what's tonight's book? Well, tonight's book is a novel, and I'm going to open the links to it now. It's called The Lullaby of Polish Girls, and it is by a woman, an actress called Dagmara Dominczyk, who you can see in HBO's Succession, which I am quite fond of. And unfortunately, because of COVID-19, well, we didn't get a season of that for a year. Supposedly, it's going to reappear in the late part of this year. Dagmara Dominczyk was born in 1976. You may have seen her in that movie Rockstar with Mark Wahlberg, which had a very interesting premise, but was not played out very well. And Jennifer Aniston, the perennial wet blanket, does not help. She was in The Count of Monte Cristo, Kinsey, Trust the Man, Running with Scissors, The Letter, The Immigrant, Big Stone Gap. She is married to an actor, Patrick Wilson, who's been in all manner of things. Her sister, Marika Dominczyk, is also an actress who's been on Grey's Anatomy, and she is married to the actor Scott Foley, who is a favorite of mine because he was in The Unit. So Dagmara Dominczyk was born in Kielce in Poland, which is in central Poland. It's about halfway between Warsaw and Krakow. And she came to the United States at the age of 7, but kept up her attachments with Poland. And this book is obviously, to a very large extent, autobiographical. How did I come to hear about this book? Well, I mentioned Succession. One of the penultimate episode of the second season had the Roy family swanking it on a enormous one of these super yachts. And so the actress J. Cameron Smith, who plays Jerry on Succession, was seen in a deck chair with a big hat and sunglasses reading a book. And I was curious to know what it was, and I got a close-up of it, and it was this book by her fellow castmate, Dagmara Dominczyk, who plays the head of PR for Waystar Royco on the show. This book, well, I guess you could call it, I suppose you could call it chick lit if you like. I thought it was rather well written, actually. It is about 3 friends, Anna, Camila, and Justina. And they're all born in Poland. About half the novel is set in Kielce itself, which is a city of about 200,000 and is chock full of gorgeous churches and other buildings. But of course, you can say that about pretty much every other city in Europe. It also has some hideous modern architecture in order to remind the world that, that Poland is not as it was. This is it's funny. I was reminded reading this book that Anne Wilson, the English novelist and one of my favorites, said, well, going back to the 1970s, it is possible to be frank about sexual matters in literature without dragging pubic hair into it. And I suppose I could joke about this book, that it is possible to be frank about sexual matters in literature without dragging genital warts in it. Another joke came to me, which is that, who would Dominczyk's favorite Polish author be, her biggest influence, literary influence? And I thought, well, it'd have to be Charles Bukowski, wouldn't it? I was taken aback by how guttermouthed this book was. I don't read a lot of contemporary fiction by women. Are they all like that? I was once chided on Twitter for having read a lot of novels by women, hundreds of them actually, but they tend to be, I suppose, women who are born sometime before 1976. So it's a woman's novel in the sense. Well, I guess this is a really a fairly modern thing. Well, with women, just this sort of this preoccupation, even an obsession with every aspect of their body, and particularly what they don't like, or which what is objectionable. The ad man Jerry Della Femina wrote a book around 1970 called "From Those Wonderful People Who Brought You Pearl Harbor." That's a joke about Panasonic, which was looking to move into the United States, and he was asked, a slogan, and he came up with that. He recounts in the book that his ad agency was asked to take on a feminine hygiene company for TV ads, and he strongly argued against it on the grounds that people would be disgusted seeing this on TV, and that it would hurt sales of the brand. As it turns out, and as we can see every day on television, it turns out that women cannot get enough of this stuff, and the more graphic, apparently, the better. Men cannot bear it, but women revel in it. So, what do we have in this book? Golly, we've got rape. We have abortion. We have sort of random, purposeless oral sex, digital sex of all kinds, masturbation. I don't know to what extent that this is, the book is, set in the beginning. It's set when Poland was still under communist occupation. And I don't know to what extent the collapse of morals that took place under communism would be responsible for the sort of sexual depravity which is demonstrated in this book. It could be that I am completely out of touch, and that women have been carrying on like this and about this. Oh, I don't know. Since the 1980s, it's quite possible. I try to stay au courant with the culture, I was impressed by this book's treatment of alienation, as I never tire of reminding people. Immigration means alienation. That when people are divorced from their homelands, from their culture, their traditions, they pay a very heavy psychic price for it, often even unto the next generation, because they've been raised by parents who have been, alienated. Now, the Anna, who is who in the book, her father was involved with the Solidarity movement, and so he came to the United States with his family as a political refugee. And so Anna grows up in New York City, but she keeps in contact with Poland, and eventually she creates a relationship, strong friendships with both Camila and Justina. Now, Camila comes to the United States as well after she discovers that Emil, her husband, who she has been after for several years, is a homosexual. Now, it's explained in the novel that everyone but her seemed to understand that Emil was homosexual, but as she said, homosexuality was not a term that was used within their circle in Kilsa at the time. Anna is an aspiring actress, and we learn that she has some success in this. Camilla is would like to be a poet. She is the least physically favored of the three, and Justina is how would I describe it? A whore. But she eventually marries and has a child, and then there is a terrible crime committed against her family. I should point out that if you go to Goodreads, you will find out that a lot of people of Polish origin in the United States read this book, and a lot of them were absolutely outraged by it. I suppose not just because of its sexual frankness, but also because it doesn't paint a particularly good picture of Poles, well, at least in Kielce. It's not fair to say that all of them are grossly overweight, crude, and alcoholic, but a large number of them seem to be so. I wanted to read some of this from the book to give you a feeling of there's some good stuff about Hollywood there. Now, of course, Dagmara is speaking from experience, and she learns that how you look counts for an enormous amount in Hollywood. Now, everyone knows this already, but I guess people think, oh, well, if I'm a good actress, then that won't really matter so much. But it does. It matters enormously. And this fear, we get a lot of this fear. I guess it's a common fear of, Slavic women, that they will end up stout or thick, as the kids are saying now. I'll read this section here. That Anna, who has appeared as an ingenue in a costume drama called a D'Artagnan, for which she was paid $200,000 and got very good notices, well, she's not getting many calls for parts. One reason is she has a completely unsatisfactory boyfriend who she rather detests. And also because of the spillover from the horrible thing that happened in Poland involving her friends. So I'll read this. So she talks to her agents here. And Jeremy, there's two of them. There is Linda and Jeremy. Linda's the manager and Jeremy is the agent. So Annie, I want to tell you a story. Years ago, I had a client who is now starring in a very popular sitcom, Linda interjects. Her lipstick is smudged, but we won't name names. Right. Jeremy smiles. Anna likes Jeremy. He's from the Midwest, and even after decades in the city, his kindness is still intact. Come on, Jer, get to it. Linda doesn't like to waste time. She's a shark. Her client list is small, a few soap stars, but she's tough and relentless. From the look of her, one could never tell. She shops the sales racks at Talbot's and has not just one, but an entire collection of denim vests. In the beginning, Anna had thought of Linda as the Jewish aunt she never had, full of quips and world-weary insight. Linda peppered her speech with Yiddish, taught Anna one of her favorite expressions, gestoigen, geflogen, which meant bullshit. They used to meet up in Central Park before important auditions, and Linda would run lines with Anna, giving her stellar pep talks. Anywho, Jeremy continues, lighting a cigarette, she was such a talent, got consistently positive feedback, but she wasn't landing any gigs. Callback after callback, but nothing ever happened. This went on for a year, and the reason was, and I'm not going to beat around the bush here, the reason was her nose. It was big, and not character actress big, but distracting big. Linda wrinkles her own nose in distaste. So one day she came into my office and she was distraught. Like, this girl was at the end of her rope. I mean, here she was, talented, terrific body, terrific face, the face of an ingenue, but for this one tiny thing. Anna downs her wine in one gulp. You mean one big thing. She grins like an idiot and eyes the focaccia, wanting to slip it into her purse for later. So Jeremy, being the nice person he is, the generous person he is, he delicately let her know that he would personally, out of his own pocket, pay for a procedure. And she was so grateful. They did it quietly, she recovered quickly, and in a few weeks she was booking jobs left and right, and then came an Emmy nod, and well, the rest is history. Linda sits back, letting her shoulders relax for the first time. Okay, so what's the moral of the story here, guys? You want me to get a nose job? Jeremy spits his wine all over the table. He frantically dabs his fancy necktie with his napkin. No, for God's sake, no. Your nose is perfect. So Slavic. Classic nose. Classic. Your face is perfect, Anna. It's not her face that's the problem. Anna knows what this is about. Perhaps in the real world, she could pass muster. Wasn't size 10 the norm? But Hollywood sells a fantasy world where even bums have white teeth and where no one ever takes a shit unless it's for comedic effect. Anna had never worried about her weight before. Her weight had always been fine, just this side of a size 6. Now she wants to play dumb, but it's either sink or swim, and if she's going to drown, then she wants to be the one to throw herself in the water. Perfectly fat, you mean? The word hangs in the air like it's written in a cartoon balloon above Anna's head. You're not fat, sweetheart, Jeremy drawls. You're just curvy. Anna smiles ruefully. I know I gained some weight. It's okay. Let's be grown-ups here and call a spade a spade. I've had a rough couple of weeks, you know. Yes, your friend's husband. That and other things, Jeremy. So yes, I've let myself go. But what are you saying right now? Are you saying you want me to get lipo? Is my career over? I don't get it. Linda arches her eyebrows. Okay, Anna. Yes, you have gained weight, and I'm sorry for whatever it is you've been going through, but you can't afford to let yourself go like this. It just doesn't suit you. You're much too beautiful to be a character actress, especially at this point in your career. Last year was slow. After the terrorist attacks at all, this scene is set in 2002. And after all, so we don't blame you for that, but you starred in 2 studio picks the year you graduated. That's something, honey. You should be very proud of that, and things are picking up again. Things are getting green-lighted left and right, but we can't work with what you've got now, and I know you're not happy about it either. Duh, Anna whispers. Yes, duh. So we get a trainer. If you can't afford one right now, we'll help you out naturally, but you need to lose it fast and furious. The point is, we support it, we believe in you, but we must do everything to get you back to you. Starve yourself if you have to. I don't care. Now, hold on, Linda. No one is saying I'm saying it. I'm saying it because pilot season will be upon us before we know it, and you need to test for at least one. At least. And when we see you looking again on January 2nd, I want you looking like you did in D'Artagnan. I see. We're giving tough love here, honey, because we truly, truly think you are poised to be a big star. Really. And it would be such a shame if 15 pounds got in the way of that. 20. Linda finishes her coffee in one gulp and motions for the check. And if I don't lose the weight, Jeremy fumbles with his credit card and Linda folds her arms. That is simply not an option. Curvy. That's an interesting word. I was reading about an actress that I had seen in Silicon Valley that I thought was rather attractive. And she said in an interview that she was told by casting directors and the like that her nose was too big and that she was too curvy. Apparently, America wants to see starved women in films. I don't think that I believe this. Perhaps it's one of those things like advertising. If it just gets repeated often enough, then people will come to believe it. I enjoyed The Lullaby of Polish Girls by Dagmara Dominczyk. You've heard the caveats. I have, it's not, none of this language shocks me. I mentioned Charles Bukowski. I have read pretty much all of his prose works. So, I have a cast iron stomach when it comes to that sort of thing. I thought that there was a considerable amount of insight vis-a-vis the subject of immigration and alienation of a person like Anna, caught between two worlds. So, yes, I would recommend this novel. Let's take a final look at the chat. Anran says Richie A. getting it was one of the greatest surprise deaths in TV history. Okay. Oh, what are we talking about here? Is this The Sopranos? Texas Feral Hog says alienation has multiple objects: alienation from oneself and alienation from society. Okay. She looks incredible in her black and white IMDb photo. In Poland, I was engineer. Okay. Oscar Toe says, honestly, I'd rather read African Lady's novel about hunting warthogs or something. These white girl topics are so awful. I find her husband, Patrick Wilson, a bland actor, says Anne Run, though he was good as the closeted Mormon in the AIDS-ridden HBO miniseries Angels in America. I think the only thing that I've seen him in was in an episode of Girls. And it was the episode where Lena Dunham, she has some sort of mishap, and she starts yelling at someone in a deli or something like this. And Patrick Wilson is there. And Patrick Wilson looks like the handsome daddy from TV commercials, right? It turns out that Patrick Wilson in Girls, that he's this rich doctor who has this fabulous pad in Brooklyn. And for some unaccountable, unbelievable reason, he invites Lena Dunham over and, makes this fabulous food and provides fabulous wine. And then, even more incredibly, apparently he is willing to have sex with Lena Dunham, which occurs. And then Lena Dunham starts ranting about how you're not taking me seriously. I told you that I was molested by my uncle. Maybe I made it up, but, there it is. And you didn't ask me about that. And I thought, oh, God. Ugh. And, of course, I was thinking the whole time that this is obviously a fantasy scene, because Lena Dunham is not going to get together with handsome Patrick Wilson, the doctor. That is never, ever going to happen. And I kept waiting for the reveal, the comic reveal at the end, where we would see Lena Dunham on her squalid bed, alone, fapping away. But no, apparently we're supposed to believe that that really happened. Okay. Quachalango says, KMG, you should sell out and be a valet and aide de camp of world's biggest Bitcoin owner. And thanks for not doing that. Who are we talking about here? It says from Jim Bowden, I've invited him when in Sydney to give a talk to our group. Sydney Trad equals Signally Traditionalists, consisting of a group of about 40 retired professors, students, academics. Still waiting on reply. I don't know who that is referring to. Barbara Streisand got Robert Redford in a movie. Yes, she did, says Anne Run. And it's not just that she looks like Barbara Streisand, and she's got, this corkscrew hair at the time. She's a communist. Am I saying enough? She has the corkscrew hair, and she's a communist, and she is the most annoying communist that you have ever run across. And yes, she gets Robert Redford. Chad Chadson says, I never watched Girls. Well, you dodged a bullet there. On the other hand, I forced myself to watch it because apparently Lena Dunham was the voice of her generation, and it was a show that everyone was talking about. Neil Terry says, interesting book choice, KMG, always something different. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Oh, there's a movie, some sort of, is it a murder mystery? This came out in the 80s, I believe, where Barbara Streisand is the world's highest paid hand model. or hand prostitute or something like that. People are paying thousands of dollars for Barbra Streisand's ministrations with her hand. Too funny. Too funny. Okay, what is coming up on the show next week? The film that we are going to be talking about is Fred Zinnemann's A Man for All Seasons, about St. Thomas More. And June 17th, a documentary, Hitchcock Truffaut, directed by Kent Jones, on June 24th, a Japanese classic from 1953, Ugetsu. And on July the 1st, Kiss Me Stupid by Billy Wilder. And there's a spoiler here. This movie was reviled by critics, and I think I know the reason why, is that Billy Wilder makes pretty explicit the similarities between show business and prostitution. I'm going to be talking about Rush's American Pilgrim next Friday on June the 18th, a dystopian novel called Immortal Life by Stanley Bing. On June 25th, a memoir of the Second World War by a fascinating character called Peter Kemp. It's called No Colors Across. And on July the 2nd, Desmond Morton's A Short History of Canada. On Monday, on Music Monday, I'm going to be talking about Bill Drummond and the £1 Million. Yes, the KLF's £1 Million and what happened to it. June 14th, I'm going to be talking, this is a happy story about a composer who was forced to flee from Germany, and he fled to England, where he was told by the BBC and others that your music is too old-fashioned, so you can't be a composer anymore. When he was in his 90s, he enjoyed a great vogue. He was rediscovered. His name was Bertolt Goldschmidt. On June the 21st, I'm going to be talking about the rather strange phenomenon of the Velvet Underground and their tremendous success after they broke up in 1970. On June the 28th, I'm going to be talking about a French icon and a father of Charlotte Gainsbourg, one of my favorite singers. He is, of course, Serge Gainsbourg, and I'm going to be discussing him as the genius, as pervert. And on July the 5th, I'm going to be discussing the Second Vienna School. So that's it for today and for this week. I shall be back on the air on Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which I could really use at this time, to be honest, my PayPal account is attached to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this: in these days of social atomization and civilizational destruction, I do dearly hope that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.